The message that changed everything arrived without warning. It echoed through every human outpost, every deep space relay, and every silent colony drifting in the dark. A voice cold, confident, utterly certain of its own power declared that humanity's time was over. They demanded we surrender. They promised mercy if we simply laid down our future and accepted their rule. For a moment, the stars seemed to hold their breath. The galaxies felt still, waiting to see how humans would respond to a threat delivered with such arrogance. But anyone who truly knew humanity already understood the truth. People don't bow so easily. Not to distance, not to danger, and definitely not to someone who thinks fear alone can break the human spirit. Across scattered fleets and hidden stations, humans listened to the ultimatum. Then, almost at once, a quiet laugh rolled through command decks and crowded corridors. It wasn't the laugh of someone foolish or reckless. It was the laugh of a species that had survived everything thrown at it: storms, wars, silence, and the long cold stretch between stars. Humanity didn't laugh because they underestimated their enemy. They laughed because they already knew their answer. They would return. They would face the challenge, and they would show the galaxy, once again, why humans were never meant to be ruled. Whispers spread quickly about the invading force. Tall ships made of dark alloy, weapons that seemed carved from lightning, and a commander who believed humanity was a minor footnote in a much larger empire. They spoke with the confidence of conquerors who had never been tested by the unpredictable force that humans became when pushed to the edge. And while the enemy boasted about their unstoppable fleet and their perfect strategy, humanity began preparing in their own way, quietly, quickly, and with that same stubborn determination that had carried them from one world to the next. In secret hangars, old engines were pulled from storage. Warships that once floated as museum relics were restored piece by piece, their hulls humming with new life. Pilots ran simulations that pushed them to their limits. Engineers worked through sleepless nights, building weapons meant to hold the line. There was no panic, no despair, only focus, only unity. Only that thin strand of steel that forms when humans understand what's at stake. Everywhere the same message repeated: if they want us to surrender, they'll have to earn it. And nobody believed they could. As the first human fleet gathered near the edge of known space, the enemy sent one final warning. They claimed that humanity would break the moment the two forces met. But humans didn't answer the message. They simply aligned their ships, locked in formation, and prepared for the ultimate clash the galaxy would remember for generations. And just when the enemy thought they knew exactly how humans would react, something unexpected happened, something that shifted the balance before the first shot was even fired. Because that quiet laugh humans shared at the beginning, it wasn't just confidence, it was a signal. A signal that the real plan was already in motion, and the truth behind that plan begins now. The signal that silently pulsed through the human fleet spread far beyond the formation of warships. It slipped into encrypted channels known only to a handful of commanders. It traveled through hidden relay stations buried inside asteroids and derelict outposts that most people believed were abandoned. It even reached a few places where humanity's presence had always been kept, quiet places, built not for glory, but for survival. The moment it activated, something old began to wake, and the enemy had no idea what kind of force they had provoked. To most people watching from the safety of distant colonies, the threat seemed simple. A powerful alien empire had arrived demanding complete surrender. But the truth stretched far deeper than anyone admitted publicly. The enemy had not appeared out of nowhere. Humans had known pieces of their existence for years: strange energy readings, lost scout ships, quiet warnings buried in encrypted reports. Something had been moving in the shadows long before the ultimatum arrived. And now, as the signal spread, a handful of human officers finally understood that this confrontation was not random. It had been coming for a long time. In the main flagship, crew members moved with steady purpose. Some were seasoned veterans with scars from older conflicts. Others were young specialists who had never fired a weapon in real combat but carried the same determination in their eyes. They all sensed that what was happening went beyond defending territory. This was about proving whether humanity still had a place in the galaxy. Each person on that ship understood their role mattered, even if they didn't know the full plan. What made the situation even more tense was the silence from command. High-ranking officers kept their conversations short, their expressions focused and unreadable. They gave instructions, but not explanations. Some crew whispered that there was a secret project hidden deep within the fleet. Others believed humanity had allies out there, waiting for the right moment to intervene. A few even thought there was a weapon, something only activated if humans faced true extinction. Nobody knew for sure. But they all felt the same pressure building as the enemy fleet grew closer, like a shadow stretching across the stars. Meanwhile, far from the front lines in the dim rooms of an old research station, a small group studied ancient data fragments. These fragments were the earliest signs that something was watching humanity from afar. Long before humans left their first solar system, these mysterious signals had been touching the edges of long-range sensors. They were like echoes from a distant civilization, always faint, always distorted. For years, researchers debated whether the signals were friendly, neutral, or dangerous. And now the truth had arrived in the form of towering warships demanding obedience. The researchers worked quietly as they pieced together clues. The enemy species had risen from a part of the galaxy humans rarely explored, a region filled with dead stars and unstable anomalies. Their empire expanded without warning, swallowing smaller civilizations before anyone could respond. But there was one detail that troubled the researchers the most. The enemy didn't conquer out of greed. They conquered out of fear. A fear of something that had once challenged them. A fear of a species they had failed to defeat in a war lost to time. And according to the old data fragments, that species shared more in common with humanity than anyone realized. That possibility created a different kind of tension. What if the enemy didn't demand surrender because they believed they were stronger? What if they demanded it because they recognized something dangerous in humanity's history, something humans had forgotten, but the enemy remembered all too well? Back on the flagship, the signal continued to pulse quietly beneath the surface of every system. It carried instructions that only specific ships could decode. These were vessels never listed in official records. They didn't travel with the main fleet. They didn't broadcast their location. And they didn't answer to normal command structures. They were part of a contingency created in secrecy, designed to activate only when humanity faced a threat it could not confront with brute force alone. As these hidden ships stirred in the darkness between stars, the enemy fleet adjusted its formation. Their command vessel moved to the front, a massive shape outlined by faint blue light. They wanted humans to see it clearly. They wanted to intimidate them before the first battle even began. But humans didn't flinch. They didn't raise their weapons yet. They held position, waiting for the moment the signal's purpose would finally reveal itself. Somewhere, deep in the silence between the two forces, the galaxy itself seemed to hold still. Because the enemy believed they understood humanity's strategy. They didn't, and what humanity was about to show them would shift everything. But for now, the hidden plan remained locked behind encrypted commands, waiting for the right second to strike. And that second was almost here. Between the two fleets, the dark stretch of space seemed to tighten, as if the universe itself sensed what was coming. The human ships held their ground while the enemy formation crept closer. Their movements slow and deliberate, like a predator studying its prey. But the humans didn't move, not yet. They were waiting for something more than a simple signal. They were waiting for alignment, for every piece of the hidden strategy to fall quietly into place. Inside the flagship, the tension threaded through every corridor. Crew members tried to stay busy, checking systems that didn't need checking and monitoring screens that hadn't changed in hours. The unease wasn't fear so much as anticipation. Everyone felt the weight of the moment pressing down. They knew the enemy believed humans were cornered. They knew the ultimatum had been issued with absolute confidence. But what the enemy didn't understand was that humans always fought hardest when someone else tried to decide their fate for them. One of the navigation officers kept glancing at a small display on his console. It didn't show enemy ships or human formations. Instead, it tracked the movement of something outside normal traffic lanes, something only a handful of people were authorized to view. When the officer noticed a slight shift in the pattern, he exhaled slowly. The hidden fleet was moving into position silent, unmarked, and completely invisible to the invading empire. But even knowing that, he couldn't shake a strange feeling. If this plan failed, there wouldn't be a second chance. Far away from the flagship, in a dim repair bay on a smaller human cruiser, a group of mechanics worked on a prototype engine. It wasn't built for speed or agility. It was built to distort the battlefield itself, bending light and energy in ways that could break the enemy's perfect formation. But the engine still suffered from unstable reactions. Every time they tested it, the power levels spiked and threatened to overload. They knew they had only one attempt once the battle started. If the engine malfunctioned at the wrong moment, the ship would tear itself apart long before it reached the front line. In another part of the galaxy, deep in an old mining colony, a lone observer monitored the enemy communications. This observer had once predicted that humanity would face a threat like this, not because of destiny, but because every rising species eventually met something that tried to put them back in their place. The observer listened carefully to the enemy's encrypted chatter. The invaders believed humanity would fold quickly or drag out a hopeless fight. There was no mention of caution. No hint that they sensed something hidden in the shadows. And that overconfidence worried the observer more than anything. Overconfidence meant the enemy still had resources they hadn't revealed. Meanwhile, the enemy commander studied the human fleet with a mix of curiosity and irritation. From their perspective, humanity's refusal to surrender wasn't bravery, it was foolishness. Their empire had crushed dozens of civilizations across the stars, each one collapsing after the first demonstration of power. Humans, however, didn't follow the pattern. They didn't retreat, they didn't scatter. They didn't even send messages begging for negotiation. They simply prepared for war with unsettling calm. The commander wondered whether humans knew something the Empire didn't. That small doubt bothered them more than they expected. Back on the flagship, whispers spread among the lower decks about strange movements in deep space. Some crew members claimed they saw faint distortions as if invisible ships were gliding by. Others believed certain sensors were being deliberately blocked to hide classified operations. Despite the secrecy, a sense of unity held everyone together. They didn't need full details, they didn't need to understand the entire plan. They simply trusted their leadership and trusted the generations of human resilience that had brought them this far. The only thing that grew steadily was the tension. The enemy ships entered weapons range, their engines glowing with slow pulses. Humanity's warships powered up their shields but did not fire. Every second stretched longer than the last. Combat was close enough to taste, yet still held back by an invisible thread. In the research station, another part of the puzzle began to unfold. The team uncovered a new fragment from the ancient signals. It wasn't large, but it hinted at something disturbing, a connection between humanity's earliest expansion and the enemy's rise to power. Something had happened ages ago, something erased from human records but remembered by the enemy. A conflict forgotten by one side, but carved deeply into the memory of the other. The researchers didn't know which side had been the aggressor, but they knew the invaders believed history was repeating itself, and that meant the threat was not just about territory. It was personal. Back at the front, the hidden fleet finally reached its position, invisible, silent, waiting. The enemy ship shifted again. Human captains gripped their controls. The signal pulsed one last time, but still nobody moved. Because the next decision would decide the fate of more than just one battle. And whatever was coming next was about to break the silence in a way that would echo across the galaxy. The space between the two forces had thinned to almost nothing. What had once felt like a vast stretch of empty darkness now felt tight and suffocating, as if the whole galaxy were holding its breath, waiting for the first spark that would ignite everything. The human fleet stayed in formation, engines humming at steady rhythms, weapons charged but silent. Across from them, the enemy formation drifted forward with slow, confident precision. Their ships looked like moving shadows, each one wrapped in a faint glow that hinted at dangerous power. Every movement they made suggested they were certain victory was only moments away. Inside the flagship, the atmosphere shifted from anxious anticipation to something sharper, something electric. The crew could feel the turning point approaching, even if no one had said it aloud. Every console screen displayed rising energy levels from the enemy ships. Every sensor picked up subtle shifts in their formation. The human captain stood quietly at the center of the bridge, watching the data scroll past with controlled calm. Not a word had been spoken about initiating the hidden plan, but everyone on the bridge sensed the moment was coming closer. One of the tactical officers kept her eyes on a secondary screen that wasn't linked to the main battle interface. It showed the silent approach of the hidden fleet, a formation of unmarked vessels that drifted through space without leaving a trace. They weren't just approaching from one direction. They were surrounding the invaders slowly, positioning themselves at perfect angles. The tactical officer swallowed hard. If the enemy detected even one of those ships too early, everything would fall apart. Humanity's entire strategy depended on flawless timing. On the enemy command vessel, the commander watched the human fleet through holographic projections that wrapped around the chamber. Their analysts whispered confidence, insisting the humans were afraid to fire first. The commander wasn't convinced. Something about the human silence felt calculated. It bothered them how calm the human ships appeared, as if the fleet was bracing for something beyond the obvious exchange of fire. Still, the commander pushed these doubts aside. Their empire had destroyed far stronger forces. Whatever the humans were trying to do, it wouldn't matter once the first strike landed. Far from the front line, the researchers studying the ancient data made a breakthrough, or something close to it. Another fragment finally decoded, revealing symbols that matched patterns the enemy used in their own communications. It wasn't just an old war humanity had forgotten, it was a warning. A message left behind by those who had once resisted the same empire. A message humans had never recognized because the original species had vanished before humans even left their first solar system. The researchers realized something chilling. The invaders feared the rise of any civilization that reminded them of their old adversary. Humanity had grown quickly, expanded boldly, and displayed the same unpredictable resilience. The enemy saw it not as coincidence, but as history repeating itself. The researchers tried to relay this discovery to the fleet, but the channels were already overwhelmed with encrypted updates. The final pieces of the plan were slotting into place. The timing was narrowing, and the confrontation was nearing the edge of eruption. Back on the human cruiser testing the unstable prototype engine, the mechanics finished their final calibration. The device emitted a low vibration that made the entire bay tremble. If everything went right, the engine would distort the battlefield just long enough for the hidden fleet to strike. If it failed, the ship would become a bright flash in the dark, and the entire plan would suffer a deadly setback. The chief mechanic placed a hand on the engine's outer casing and closed their eyes for a moment, as if offering a silent promise. This was their contribution to humanity's survival: one chance, one shot, no second attempts. Back at the front line, the enemy fleet adjusted again. Their forward weapons brightened, glowing with a rising charge. Human sensors registered the spike immediately. The bridge crew exchanged tense glances. This was it. The enemy was preparing to fire the opening strike. The captain finally spoke, their voice steady despite the pressure gripping every person in the room. They issued a single command, quiet but decisive, instructing the fleet to prepare for the final phase of the hidden plan. Every human ship responded at once. Engines shifted into new formations, shields rebalanced. Communications channels locked into new encrypted patterns. It wasn't visible to the enemy, but the entire human fleet moved as if guided by a single pulse. The enemy commander raised a hand, signaling their gunners to prepare the first wave. The prototype engine roared to life on the distant human cruiser. The hidden fleet finished its encirclement in icy silence. And between the two armadas, the darkness thinned to a razor's edge, quivering under the pressure of everything about to unfold. Then, in a single, unbearable moment, both sides crossed the final threshold, and the clash that would decide the future of entire worlds was about to ignite. The moment before everything ignited stretched so long it felt unreal, like time itself hesitated. The enemy fleet held its final charge, their weapons glowing brighter with each passing second, ready to unleash the first devastating strike. Human ships steadied themselves, shields humming under rising tension. The hidden fleet waited in perfect silence. The prototype engine thundered like a heartbeat about to rupture. Everything was set. Everything was aligned. And then something no one expected happened. Before the enemy could fire, a sudden ripple tore across the battlefield, an energy wave so massive and so unnatural it bent the starlight itself. Screens across the human flagship flickered, sensors went blind. The enemy formation staggered as several of their ships drifted off course. Alarms rang on both sides as the wave rolled through every vessel, silencing weapons, shorting scanners, and scattering encrypted signals like dust in a storm. It lasted only a few seconds, but the effect was overwhelming. For a moment, both fleets were left in near-total blindness. The human captains steadied themselves as the bridge crew struggled to reboot systems. No one knew where the wave came from, not the enemy, not the researchers, not even the hidden fleet. It wasn't part of the plan. It wasn't part of anything humanity had prepared for. The prototype engine hadn't activated yet. This was something else entirely, something older. Something deeper. As systems flickered back online, tactical officers scanned the battlefield in confusion. The enemy commander shouted orders across their bridge, demanding explanations from their analysts. But the truth became visible within seconds. A third presence had entered the field. Far beyond both fleets, a massive structure emerged from the shadows, something silent, ancient, and unmistakably artificial. It wasn't a ship, it wasn't a station. It looked like a broken ring world, half collapsed, drifting with a faint inner glow. No human had ever recorded its existence. No explorer had charted this region with such detail. It had been invisible until now, and the energy wave had come from inside it. The researchers on the distant station were the first to understand. As they studied the old fragments, they realized the ancient messages weren't merely warnings, they were coordinates. And those coordinates pointed exactly to where the battle was taking place. The forgotten species that once resisted the enemy had left something behind, something buried in the dark that had gone unnoticed for ages. The researchers tried to send an alert to the fleet, but communications remained unstable, scrambled by the energy wave. On the flagship, the captain watched the structure appear on the main screen with cold disbelief. Its cracked surface glimmered with worn symbols that matched the patterns found in the fragments the researchers had studied. This wasn't a random ruin drifting through space. It was connected to the old war the enemy feared so deeply. The enemy commander saw it too, and their reaction changed everything. Their confident stance vanished. Their expression tightened with a sharp fear no one in their crew had seen before. They issued frantic orders, forcing their fleet to widen formation, shields raised at full power. Their analysts scrambled to restore long-range sensors, their voices shaking. No longer did they speak of an easy victory. Instead, they whispered about possibilities their empire had prayed never to face again. Back in the hidden fleet, human captains exchanged quick, uneasy signals. None of them had planned for a third force entering the battlefield. Their strategy depended on precise timing, but now the battlefield itself had shifted. The enemy wasn't just facing humans anymore, they were reacting to something humanity had stumbled into without knowing. On the human cruiser with the unstable prototype engine, the device shuddered violently. The energy wave had disrupted its internal core. Lights flickered through the bay and sparks danced from overloaded conduits. The mechanics raced to stabilize it, their hands moving faster than their fear. If the engine detonated early, it could ruin the entire operation and tear the ship apart. But if they shut it down, the hidden fleet would lose its biggest advantage. The choice pressed down on them with crushing weight. Across the front line, the enemy ships shifted into a defensive posture. Their weapons flickered uncertainly, some failing to recharge. Their movements grew erratic. They were no longer advancing, they were bracing. And then another twist struck. The ring structure began emitting a slow pulse, not violent like the first wave, but steady and rhythmic, almost like a beacon waking from centuries of sleep. Its glow deepened, and faint lines traced across its cracked frame, forming patterns that matched the symbols decoded by the researchers. The captain realized the truth with a chill. The structure wasn't just activating. It was responding to what? No one could answer. But one thing was clear: the ancient adversaries of the enemy had left behind something that was never meant to remain hidden. And its awakening was changing the entire balance of the coming clash. Humanity had prepared for a battle against a powerful empire. They hadn't expected to stand on the edge of a forgotten war. And now, with the structure stirring and both fleets scrambling, the real danger was only beginning to surface: something capable of shifting the fate of every living world. And it was waking fast. The ring's pulse grew stronger until it seemed to echo through every ship, every console, every breath taken across the battlefield. Human crews steadied themselves as their screens filled with symbols and readings no one fully understood. The enemy ships recoiled, pulling back in a panic that betrayed a truth they had hidden beneath all their threats and confidence. They weren't afraid of humanity. They were afraid of this. The human captain watched the expanding glow with a mixture of awe and dread. The structure wasn't attacking, but its awakening had shifted everything. The hidden fleet sent urgent signals, asking if the original plan was still active. The captain hesitated for the first time. The conflict between humans and the invaders felt suddenly small compared to whatever was stirring inside the ring. But hesitation lasted only seconds. The enemy fleet regained enough stability to charge their forward weapons again. Whatever fear they felt, they still intended to destroy humanity before dealing with the awakened relic. Their commander gave the order to fire. The first bolts of energy shot across space like silent lightning. The prototype engine cruiser pushed its unstable device to maximum output. The ship trembled, metal groaned. The mechanics braced themselves as the engine activated fully for the first and possibly last time. A burst of distorted energy swept out from the cruiser, bending space between the fleets. The enemy's first volley twisted mid-flight, scattering harmlessly into empty darkness. That was the signal. The hidden fleet dropped their cloaking fields, emerging like a sudden storm around the enemy formation. Human ships unleashed precise strikes from every angle, forcing the invaders to redirect their shields. The enemy commander shouted frantic orders, trying to maintain their defenses, but the encirclement was already complete. Humanity had turned the battlefield into a trap. The flagships surged forward, leading the main fleet in a coordinated advance. Human vessels moved in tight formation, every engine burn-aligned, every weapon synchronized. The invading empire found themselves contained, overwhelmed, and for the first time in centuries, cornered. But the battle wasn't decided yet. The ring pulsed again, this time with a force that shook reality. A beam of light shot upward from its broken core, stretching far into the void. The symbol on the hull glowed brighter than before, and then something impossible happened. Every ship, human and enemy alike, received the same message. Not words. Not images, a feeling, a memory. A memory of the ones who came before. Humans saw flashes of a forgotten species, tall, bright, resilient, standing against the same invaders ages ago. They had fought fiercely, almost winning, before finally vanishing. Not destroyed, hidden, the ring wasn't just a relic, it was a key. And it had been waiting for a species stubborn enough to stand in the same place, under the same threat, refusing to surrender. The enemy commander collapsed into their chair as the connection faded. They understood the message far more clearly than any human did. Their empire had feared this moment for generations. The return of a rival. The rise of a new, unpredictable challenger. The echo of their old defeat. And now they had triggered the awakening themselves. Human ships pressed their advantage. The enemy fleet fractured under the pressure. Several vessels shut down their weapons, overwhelmed by panic. Others tried to flee, slamming into the growing distortions near the ring's expanding energy. The battle was tipping toward humanity, not by sheer power, but by the enemy's sudden collapse of morale. Finally, after one last desperate flurry of attacks, the enemy command vessel broadcast a short message, not a threat, not another demand. It was surrender. The battlefield fell still. Human ships held formation, prepared for deception, but none came. One by one, the enemy vessels powered down, drifting quietly in defeat. The hidden fleet secured the perimeter. The prototype engine stabilized, its power fading. Humanity had done the impossible. They had forced back a civilization that once dominated half the galaxy. But just as the human captain allowed themselves a breath of relief, the unexpected twist arrived. The ring pulsed one final time, and a doorway, thin, shimmering, and nearly invisible, opened inside the broken structure. Something moved behind it. Not hostile, not threatening, but unmistakably alive. The researchers sent a frantic message, finally breaking through the interference. The fragments they had decoded didn't just describe the old species. They described preservation, a last refuge. A seed left behind in case one day the enemy returned. The doorway widened. The silhouette on the other side took a slow step forward. The human captain stared, heart pounding, realizing the truth. The old species hadn't vanished. They had been waiting. And now that the invaders were defeated, they were returning, awakening in the shadow of humanity's victory, stepping into a galaxy that had changed while they slept. Whatever humanity had just won was only the beginning of something much larger. The doorway shimmered for a few moments longer before solidifying, revealing more than just a shadow. A figure emerged, tall and imposing, with an aura that radiated both calm authority and subtle power. Their presence was unfamiliar yet oddly comforting, as if the galaxy itself recognized a long-lost balance returning. Human crews watched in quiet awe, their weapons still powered but unmoved. They had fought to survive, to protect their homes and colonies, and now they faced a living echo of history, an ally they hadn't known they needed. The figure spoke, though not in words the humans immediately understood. Instead, the meaning filled their minds like a message delivered through thought and instinct. They understood the ring had been a preservation vessel, a seed of intelligence left behind by a civilization that had once resisted the invaders and now saw in humanity the same resilience and courage. The message was clear. Humans had proven themselves worthy not just by refusing to surrender, but by acting with strategy, unity, and relentless determination. The new arrivals would guide them, share knowledge, and help rebuild what the enemy had threatened to destroy. On the enemy side, the surviving fleet drifted in stunned silence. The surrender wasn't simply the collapse of human resistance, it was the collapse of the enemy's certainty. They had expected to confront a stubborn species, but they hadn't anticipated history itself returning to judge them. The invaders had underestimated humans not because of arrogance alone, but because they failed to see the same spark of unpredictability that had once challenged their ancestors. It was a lesson they would carry forward, whether willingly or not, in the form of surrender and retreat. The human flagship sent a cautious approach toward the newcomers, scanning for traps or hidden threats, but there were none. The figures moved among the human fleet with a measured grace, their presence immediately stabilizing the chaotic energy from the ring. Engineers and scientists scrambled to record data, every reading on their sensors confirming that humanity had just crossed into a new chapter of galactic history. Pilots whispered excitedly among themselves. For the first time in decades, there was hope that the future could be more than mere survival. The prototype engine cruiser, which had trembled and sparked throughout the battle, now lay silent but intact. Its mission had worked perfectly, not through sheer firepower, but through careful timing and human ingenuity. The mechanics exchanged quiet, proud smiles, knowing they had contributed to a decisive moment in history. Their efforts were a reminder that victories weren't only forged in grand battles. They were built in workshops, in command centers, and in the persistence of people refusing to accept limits. As the fleets gathered for post-battle alignment, the human captain allowed themselves a long breath. The victory had been hard-fought, and it had demanded every ounce of human ingenuity, courage, and collaboration. Yet, even in this moment of triumph, there was a recognition that the galaxy remained vast, unpredictable, and full of challenges. The invaders had been stopped, yes, but new mysteries and unknown threats would always lurk beyond the next star. In private channels, the researchers discussed the significance of the ring and the returning species. They realized that humanity had been given more than just a victory. They had been offered an opportunity to learn, to expand responsibly, and to step into a legacy of civilizations that had once shaped the galaxy. Humans hadn't just survived, they had proven themselves a force that could shape history itself, a species that could endure beyond fear, beyond threat, beyond expectation. The human fleet began its slow return to known space, carrying the message of victory to distant colonies. Communities that had trembled at the thought of surrender now celebrated the tenacity that had carried them through. Children gazed at the stars with wonder, dreaming of the possibilities of exploration, alliance, and growth. Leaders recorded lessons from the battle, ensuring that future generations would carry the memory of resilience, strategy, and unity that had defined this fight. Yet, even as humanity celebrated, the final ripple of suspense lingered. The returning species had stepped into the galaxy, but what secrets they held, what technologies they possessed, and what expectations they might place upon humans remained unknown. There was a sense that the galaxy was larger than ever imagined, and that humanity's place within it was just beginning to unfold. The victory over the enemy fleet was monumental, but it was only the first step into a wider, more complex universe. From the flagship bridge, the captain looked out into the dark expanse. Stars twinkled, distant worlds waited, and human ingenuity had proven capable of facing threats no one had dared to predict. The galaxy was still a place of uncertainty, but humanity had shown that it could rise to any challenge. They had laughed in the face of surrender, stood against overwhelming force, and now stood ready to embrace the future whatever it might bring. The warships sailed home. The hidden fleet returned to the shadows, their purpose fulfilled. The ancient ring pulsed softly behind them, a reminder that history, resilience, and courage were forever intertwined. Humanity had survived. Humanity had won. And yet, the universe remained alive with mystery, adventure, and the promise that the next challenge was always waiting beyond the stars. The story of survival, ingenuity, and human spirit had reached a milestone, but the journey, as always, continued.